everybody. I am Raymond Camden. I am a developer evangelist for Adobe. Not talking about anything at all Adobe related today, but if you ever needed to do any kind of document automation, mass conversion to PDF or PDF to Office, etc., we have APIs for that. Come find me. I'll be happy to talk to you about them. If you have any questions about what I am talking about today, you can find me on the interwebs at raymondcamden.com, and you are also welcome to drop me an email as well. All right, this is where you take your camera out and you take a picture and you think, yeah, when I get back from work, I'm totally gonna look this up and I'm gonna research this. I'm totally gonna do it this time. So I'll let you all do that. I think every time I step forward, there's a bit of reverb. So I'm going to try my best to stay back here and kill that. All right. So the agenda today, I'm going to talk about what it is in terms of INTL. All right. Do you think we should turn it off?
I make adjustments.
All right. I am...
Hold on. I know enough about audio.
All right, for the record, we told him not to do that.
Okay, how does that sound? All right, a little better. I'm terrified of loud noises. I'm like a dog, I guess, and I'm always panicked that there's going to be a giant reverb. So we'll talk about what INTL is, what it isn't, and we have lots and lots of demos. I'll say all of the, that's really annoying. All of the demos are up on my code pen. Is it as bad? Should I turn it off? Okay, to me, I'm hearing a lot of like lot of reverb. So if you guys are okay, I'll just keep trucking on. So what it is a namespace object. And that is just a fancy way of saying that it's going to be a bucket of different APIs. Most of the APIs that I've worked with on the web platform tend to do one particular thing. And INTL is actually like a family of related APIs. It will support internationalization of numbers and dates. It also has functions for working with strings and so forth. It can also aid in doing string comparison for if you are a non-English speaker, you know, they don't always follow the exact same rules that we do in English. And it does a lot more. We're going to try to cover as much as possible, but not everything. If you are having trouble sleeping, I encourage you to go to the specification. And 5 hours later, you will know everything that I'm teaching today in a somewhat less exciting format, hopefully. It is incredibly well supported. There's one exception on Firefox that I'll be showing today, and I'll clearly spell it out, but outside of that, you won't run into any issues. Even in the modern IE6, which we all know is Safari, right? Yeah, Safari is not a great browser, unfortunately. So what this spec is not, this is not translation, all right? So you can't give it dog and get Xian out. It is not internationalization of your UI. So to be clear, this gives you the tools to do that. It's not going to look at your web page and say, oh, you have numbers there. I should make that better. You have to actually go in there and figure out what needs to be updated with this particular specification. This is not currency exchange. And I say this because I've been talking about this topic for a couple of years now. One of the very first demos I did was, oh, let's take 100 and print it in dollars. Great. Let's take 100 and print it in francs. That works perfectly, right? No, it's not. You do actually have to use a different API to figure out what 100 USD would be and 100 euros. The general syntax, pretty much every single thing I'm showing today, you will make a new instance of intl.something. This will default to the user's locale, or you can actually specify it. This part where you can specify gets incredibly complex. I literally thought it was just a string. but you can really kind of go in there and say, I really want you to speak American English, but you could fall back to British English and so forth. You could literally describe to the browser what you're aiming for, and the browser will attempt to match it. And that's all of what I just said. Typically, almost all of the APIs are all going to use the exact same function format. There'll be some slight variations of that. In terms of figuring out the user's language, the browser has not one, but two things baked in, and I think baked in since like day one of the web platform. Navigator.language is what the user has specified, or typically what happens on their operating system when an app is running. It could ask the operating system, hey, what language is installed here? I think it's pretty rare for most users to go in and change that. It just picks up on the operating system. Navigator.languages is an array-based list of the languages that they support, with the first element being their most preferred. So we prefer the Queen's English #1, and if we can't support that, we'll fall back to that mongrel American English in second place. There's also a header, but don't forget that JavaScript can't read headers sent in the request. If you are using a server-side language of some sort, Node, PHP, Cold Fusion, etc., in theory, you could read that, and when you serve the page back up to the user, you can include that information in the result. So you have 3 different ways baked into the browser of figuring out what the user can speak. And as an example, this is CodePen. I'm just outputting the values, and you can see that second one, that array. My preferred language #1 is American English, with just English being #2. What you don't want to do, and what everybody does anyway because screw you, is use the user's IP location. Because obviously, when my machine here that broadcasts, I speak English, I bring it to France, it still says, I speak English. And the website says, oh, parlez-vous français? But of course, certainly because you moved to a different location, surely you have learned the language. Every website in the world does this. Please don't do this. It's so stupid. There are valid reasons for looking at the person's IP address. You may have different products for sale based on where they are. But guess what? Their language is not changing. So don't do that. And if you can, obviously try to give them a choice out of that. So one of the first big buckets in the INTL's namespace we'll talk about is date formatting. This is actually the very first thing that got me interested in this spec. It will be intl.datetimeformat. Can do dates, times, both. It has multiple baked-in styles and can also do ranges. I just discovered this like 2 months or so ago. Back up though. The baked-in styles allows you to do like a quick alias for, I don't want to configure everything, just give me a nice name things. But you absolutely can get incredibly specific about weekdays should look like this, months should look like this, and hours should look like that. As a quick example, I created a new date, and I'm running a new intl.datetimeformat and formatting that value. And that should print, hopefully, November 19th. I was honestly not 100% sure what today is, so I really did think it was the 18th. If I wanted to specify a particular locale, in this case, British English, I get the same thing, except I get days, months, years, which I think the entire rest of the planet does, except for America. I'm sure we'll switch to that once we go metric. Now, in the last 2 examples, I was just kind of chaining, make the object one format. Typically, you kind of want to reuse it. So as just a quick example of that, I created a new instance of INTL datetime format. I called it formatter, and I just ran it twice on 2 different date values, one for today, one for tomorrow, and we see what we expect, unless things have gone very, very wrong. So some of the options that you can pass to this include the locale, calendar, and numbering system. I won't click on this. I knew abstractly that there were more calendars. I was vaguely familiar that I think In China, they had a different one. I think the Jewish faith has a different calendar. And when I clicked on that link, there were like 30 different calendars out there. I was blown away. But what's even more cool is that the browser supports all of them, including different numbering systems as well. There's also the ability to do a 24-hour override. Excuse me? Sorry. I'm getting a lot of reverb there. They're all happy with you. All still happy, right? Okay, then it could just be me. If in a particular locality, their default is to have a 24-hour clock, and I think most of Europe does that. If you don't like that, you could say, I want to use a French locale, but I want to tweak 24 hours to not be the, oh, that's perfect. All right, so that's still good for y'all? Thank you so much. You could do time zones, etc. You can specify formatting for a lot of things, including day period that I had never heard of until about last week. You can get down to fractional seconds if you want to tweak that. The baked-in styles that I was talking about are full, long, medium, and short. And just to give you an idea, I could specify for date and time, I'm going to use the baked-in style long, and I get this incredibly long, very detailed timestamp. If I switch that to short, yes, let me back up. You have a question, sir? His question is, what is an era? That is the name for AC and BD. AD, BC and AD. That's the era. Example of short, guess what? It's shorter. And we can actually get crazy and mix this up together. So I'm going to pick today, right now, home style like that. And if I want the date style to be full, but the time to be a bit shorter, I can tweak it like this. If I want something a little bit more, let's go to medium. And you can tweak that and just do whatever makes sense for your thing. And so in case it isn't obvious, even if you don't care about other countries, you only care about your particular website content. If you just want to format dates, this is baked in. In fact, when I first did it, I was working on my blog. I just wanted to do dates a bit nicer. I wasn't concerned about making it nice for my European friends. I wanted it nicer in my particular time zone. And being able to use this and kind of get that baked in, I mean, how many people have installed like a date library, Moment, or one of the 500 other ones? Yeah, so I was just happy to see this baked in. Click. So if you want to get specific, in this case, I'm specifying a format for year, month, day, and day period. Day period is one that I mentioned that was new to me. You see, November 19th, 24 in the afternoon. Yeah, day period actually tells you what time of day. And I actually played with this. I think until 6 a.m., it's night. 6 a.m. is morning. I think 12 to 6 is afternoon, and then it becomes evening. I'm not sure who decided those rules, but they actually have that as part of the specification. So date range formatting, as you can imagine, this will take 2 dates. Technically, you could pass 1. This takes the exact same formatting options and displays the range between them intelligently, and that will make sense when I show some code running. So I'm going to pick a date. I'm going to pick yesterday, and I'm going to pick today or tomorrow. And it's very, very long here. We'll make this a bit shorter. So what the format range function is doing is basically applying the same formatting to both days and putting a dash in the middle. Now, if I go in here and pick the same day, 11/18, remember when I said it was intelligent? It actually recognized that I picked the same date and time for both and just dropped it. It's like, oh, it's no longer a range. If I go and pick later in the day, it brings it back in, but notice it only prints the time. It recognizes the same day. And if I don't care about time, if I pass nothing for that, it goes back to just having one date. So this is very, very cool and that it hits those edge cases that you think I'd have to do something manual for. Yes, in the back.
Is there any way to get it to recognize that you have the same month and do like November 12th, 14th or something like that?
Is your question basically, will it handle the same month? So if I pick November 1st and November 3rd, let's do that. So let me pick a different day. And yeah. So you also don't want the year, maybe. You should be able to turn year off. I'm only using the baked in styles. I should be able to do just the year, just the months. I have a link to the docs if you want to read more. Relative date formatting. It's the intl.relative time format API. Describes a time in the past or future in so many days or so many days ago. Supports numbers and units. And you'll see an example of that in a second. And you can get very, very precise in terms of how far away something is. It also supports turning off numeric answers. So 0 hours, that's a valid duration or a relative time. We're going to lunch in 0 hours. But we typically say now. API actually has that baked in, where you can say when it is now, make it now. So this is an example. I made an instance of relative time format, and you pass a number and a unit. In this case, I did -1 day and 1 minute, and I get 1 day ago and in 1 minute. And if we change this, we'll say in 1 day, and say numeric is auto, and it switches to tomorrow. And this will actually be localized based in different languages. And I would happily tell you that word in other languages, but I am very, very bad in other languages. I have a son who's incredibly fluent in Spanish. I have a daughter who's a Mandarin speaker, and I have been told I have the worst pronunciation on the planet. If we mess with this, go up higher, you can see it switched from that kind of shorthand to the real value. And you can tweak also, yeah, it went from 5 days to 5D. And I would assume in your language, if a day was bread, it would use B instead. Also, if your language has bread for days, that sounds perfect. So that's a cool format, but how do you pick the units? So typically, like in my database, I have an event happening tomorrow, and I have like a timestamp. How do I tell users how far away that is? Because the spec demands I give it a unit, right? I tell it, oh, it's so many hours. What number do I use? If Christmas is in 30 days or something, typically we don't say, oh, Christmas is in 842 hours. Now, for Christmas, we typically say days. If Taylor Swift is doing a big announcement on her social media platform, typically that's going to be like 5 p.m. Central. We'll have hours because we know fans will obsessively be watching every hour go down and then minutes and seconds. If my kids are going to move out at some point in 18 years, I'm going to represent that as years. All of those decisions, though, were me thinking about what makes sense in context. So the spec can't figure that out for you. You kind of have to do it yourself. So I have a blog post. If you get the slide deck, I have a link to it where I kind of talk about my logic for figuring this out. It literally boils down to it depends. That's my way of saying good luck. I'll see y'all later. Again, a link to the docs for you. Duration date formatting, intl.duration format, responsible for describing a span of time. And it gets incredibly specific. So you can go from months to nanoseconds. And actually, I want to say, I think years works as well, and I just didn't include it on there. Has baked-in styles. Digital is like an alarm clock. Kind of weird, but it's supported. And I do think you see that for duration sometimes, like 46 minutes, 00:46, and so forth. You can specify formatting for different parts and so forth. And you could also say, even if I don't tell you how many months, I always want you to show it. I will say, like, going through this slide deck and building it, they were all kind of weird features where I thought there was probably one person in the room who said, I have a use case like this. And they're like, screw it, we'll include that as well. I would much rather have an API that covers all the bases versus one that has you writing a lot of code to make things missing. This is the only thing that does not work in Firefox. So as an example, I create an object representing my duration. I have hours and minutes. And then I just make an instance and call format on that value. And I get 28 hours, 19 minutes. If we switch that to a different style, and I say always show days, because for whatever reason I want to do that, 0 days, 28, 19 minutes. And that was days display equals always. If I want to switch it to Spanish just to see that it actually works. Anybody here a native Spanish speaker? Oh, good. I won't mess it up then. This is perfect. 28 horas y 19 minutos. And as far as you know, that was perfect pronunciation. My son right now, he's in Germany. He's shaking his head. He felt a disturbance in the force of how bad I said that. So I have a code pin here where if you want to play with it, you can see how it renders and so forth. Could be useful. It's baked in, yes.
I guess this is for internationalization, but would this be useful to, for example, put in 1 week and have that sort of translate into milliseconds for use in, like JavaScript, just like as a number?
Is your question, could I use this to convert 1 week to milliseconds? No. No, this is going to 1 week. So you have specified a duration of 1 week, and this will say 1 week in America, 1 baguette in France, and so forth. For what you want to do, you would have to just do math. Yeah, week is 7 days, days, hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds, etc. So, oh, by the way, this also has the same issue as relative time. What you specify for your duration. Again, typically you have 2 data points, 2 dates. So how would you describe that as a duration? I have been alive for 51 years. Typically, I would not render 51 years, 100 days, so many hours and seconds. I would instead do years. So in my database, I need to get those values and figure out how many whole years, because that makes sense for human ages. So you would need to look at whatever you're building and make it make sense for that. So quick question, anybody here not from America? And feels okay saying that, I should say. Okay, first off, when you leave, can I come with you? Is that? All right. By the way, I also have a wife, 8 kids, 6 cats, and a dog. Is it still okay? All right. So you in particular, what date is this?
February 9th, 2024.
And is that because you mentally translated Raymond's in America? He's writing. Okay. So, but I'm a good web developer. So when I built this, I sniffed your locale and I made it correct. So that's actually September 2nd, 2024. So I helped you, right? But you didn't know, right? Another kind of related example of this, I was attending a conference in California, and the website helped me by sniffing my laptop's time zone and fixing the times for me. And I almost missed presenting because the conference was like, oh, I'll just fix the times for you. Whereas in my brain, I'm like, this is a California website. It's a California conference. The times would obviously be right. And it was only a 2-hour difference. So nothing flagged in my brain that they were doing that. So yes, you can use these APIs to render your dates out for people in a way that makes sense for them, but you definitely want to have some thought in terms of how am I going to flag this so that they know Like if you are booking a calendar to come see me on that date, on that particular date, I want to make sure you are aware of what I'm doing. So one easy way, I did see a question, I'll get to it. One easy way, don't use this. Do March, etc. And again, the API would support doing the French, German, etc. version of that. Look out for things that could still possibly be confusing after this. And you had a question, I think?
Can you pass in custom formats? So a lot of our international formats, we do year, month, day, and we do hyphens in between each rather than the slashes. Can you pass in custom format into the international format?
So his question was, can I fully customize it in terms of like, I want to put a cat emoji in there? No. So you have like the 3 baked in styles, and then you have per unit style, but you can't say, instead of using, like for that range, instead of using a dash, I couldn't say use, isn't there like a Unicode character for a special dash, M dash? I could not do that. That's a great question, thank you. This better be as good as, what's that? No. Yeah, his question was, is our mask supported? No. So let's go to numbers. Intl, that number format, formats numbers and currencies, can actually support numbers larger than max int. Obviously, this would be a string, but it can still format that number. And we all know what max int is, so I won't bother repeating that. Also supports doing formatting for units of things, so gallons, liters, and so forth. Also has a built-in simplification thing, which I freaking love, especially on stats page. If you see that, oh, our sales last year were 984,649,9216, that's great. Or 9.2 billion. Probably you're happy with the 9.2 billion versus the very large number. Again, this is baked in. You also have some default styles as well as the ability to be more specific. And this also supports ranges as well. So as an example, I take a number. By the way, who here does not know what this is? Be brave, it's okay. I know next to nothing. Everybody here knows what this is, okay? For the person who's shy, modern JavaScript browsers support the ability to add in a character in large numbers to make them more readable. It is ignored by the browser, but visually, we can all tell what that number is, right? You can't use commas, because that would actually break JavaScript, but this is supported as just a visual indicator of the 1,000 places in a large number. So I'm taking that, and I'm going to run number format on it. I've specified my locale. Style is decimal. This basically means don't do currency, treat it as a number, and I get what you would expect. If I were to switch that to French, I get that instead. I don't know how they read that, but you know what? They have all the best wine and food and cities and everything else, so they can live with the weird numbers. So in terms of some options, in terms of formatting, I'm going to go through, I'm going to show all these. This is a heck of a lot. I think for most of these, you could probably read it and understand maximum significant digits. See, I had math class, I remember what that is. But there's 3 different options for rounding. This gets incredibly specific. So for example, most of us, when we do rounding, we say, okay, we're going to round to 2 decimal places. And then after that, if it's 5 or higher, we go up by 1. However, apparently there are people who instead say, we are going to round based on 0.25 or 0.33, etc. And the API supports changing the rounding behavior to match those stopping points or whatever. All I could think of is there's probably maybe financial institutions where they round a bit different than we do typically. There's a lot in there, and pretty much any type of way that you could imagine formatting a number, there is a part of the specification that allows you to do it. So as an example, I have written this code many, many times. Normally when I was doing date formatting and wanted to show, or hour formatting, before I used Intl, if number less than 10, write 0 plus number. If you feel like writing more code, you can instead use formatting and say, I want a minimum integer digits of 2. Now, this is kind of a bad example, but if you've ever seen something where it's like 9 digits and you want to pad it with zeros, this would be a way of handling that. Also, you could just use pad. Another example, maximum significant digits of 4. I could take that very large number and simplify it a bit. So that was 544 million set to 4 significant digits, so it rounded to the 4th one, as well as doing the formatting and adding the commas and so forth. If I want to take a very large number and simplify it, there's a notation called compact. And bam, it just handles it for you. Again, there's probably certain people or scientists who are like, oh my God, that's so wrong. And then there's everybody else who is very happy seeing a simpler number. I will say, I hate to even say the name of the word site. I'm going to say the old name. Twitter actually is the first place where I saw this, where on their follower account, you would have like 12,000 commas, so forth, but they would simplify it to like 12K. And I thought that was great UX. What else? I'll also say I tested how high it goes. It only goes up to trillions. It will still format it once you get past trillions, so quintillion, quadrillion, etc. One of the mobile games I play had large numbers, and I went down a rabbit hole on Wikipedia one day and found the 30 different names: septillion, sextillion, decalillion, doxillion. There's all these names for really, really huge numbers. The spec only supports up to a trillion. I should say 999 trillion. Again, if you go over that, it'll still show it. There'll be 9,999 trillion. An example of compact with display equals long actually writes the word out, which to me, it's still easier to read, but I don't like seeing all that text there. But this would also still be localized in your language. For formatting ranges, uses the same options that we've had before. And if the two values are close, we'll use an approximate equals value. I had no idea what that meant, but you'll see in a second. This is one of the few exceptions to using format. It uses format range. And as an example, I've got two numbers, A and B. And instead of doing format a number, I just do format range A and B. I could still pass the exact same formatting options I had before. So this gives me 9,000 to 1 million. Make sense? To see an example of this, and we'll talk about that approximate equals thing. You saw it there for a split second. So 0 to 100, you can obviously do negative numbers. I could do 900. It doesn't apply any like A has to be bigger or smaller than B. It just takes whatever you want and passes it. And like y'all both asked, there's no control over that formatting. It's just going to be a dash. The approximate equals thing, if we go from 1 to 2, and we do 1.9, it still formats it. 1.99, still does it. 1.999, and then bam, at that precision, it just says approximately 2. And I did actually change locales, and there's different symbols based on different languages. Yes?
When you had the example with 1,000 in it, could you have made it so that the cutoff was like, because to me I would have written 1,000,2 3 million or something, instead of 1 and the word 1,000.
Oh, so your question was, when I was formatting ranges, and it said 1,000 to 4 million, could I just have 1,000, 1 comma 000, no word, dash 4 million? Is that what you're asking?
Number is, like, I wouldn't spell out the word thousands. I would only start doing it, like, for numbers larger. But that would...
Oh, so you're saying you don't want to have a simplification for 1,000, but you do want to have one for millions. You'd have to do that on your own. So do some math, yeah. I would still use the number formatting. So 1000 becomes 1 comma 0, or the appropriate thing for your locale. But then if number greater than 99,000, then do what you suggested. What's that?
I said don't use the built-in range feature, but do use number format for each one individually.
Yes, that would be another option, yeah. All right, so currency formats a number in a particular currency. Remember, currency is not equal to locale. So I can take a number that is American dollars and say, I want you to format it for the French, but make sure you're doing American dollars. Just like I could say something sold for X euros. I want to render that in an American market. So use American formatting, but for the euro currency. As an example of this, it's still using intl.number format. The style is currency, and you have to pass a currency. So you could argue EN-US, America, has a default currency. The spec does not support that. You have to actually tell it what currency you are using. They do document all these values, so you don't necessarily have to know them. And you then run format on it, and you get the right value. Notice it added the $, the commas, and the cents at the end. If I change that to French, but still in American currency, I could see that, oh, in France, they put the $, they add US, because that's how they do it there. I don't have to worry about it because the spec did it for me. You can also use other options like making it compact. So I want to format a currency, but I like that MBT, etc. format. And that's all that is. And in this example, yeah, you can actually tell it to show the name of the currency, which is kind of nice. Make sense? All right, so that was the easy stuff. Now we get into the weird stuff. And I will warn you, one of these specs I don't get. I will try my best. So list formatting, intl.list format, formats a list of items. I literally found this when I was thinking, oh, I have a list of strings in an array. I need to write some code that goes over each one, and before the last element adds the word and. Turns out there's actually a spec with that built in. It also supports a list where it's going to be an exclusive X, Y, or Z versus and also supports doing not that, which seems a bit silly, but it's there. intl.list format, and you pass it an array, and literally that's it. So I have 3 array items there, and I get cats, dogs, and books. That word "and" came from the fact that I'm using English. If I switch that to Spanish, I get E instead.
And you get rid of the outro comma.
Yeah, thank you. I just noticed that. Yeah, so English, cats, comma, dogs, comma, and books. In Spanish, cats, comma, dogs, e-books, no trailing comma. Again, that's the kind of thing like, oh, I got to write a rule for that. Like, oh no, it's just there. So let's take an example of this. Things I like: apples. What? Beers, cats, dogs, and typing in front of people. So built-in way to make this list is conjunction. That's the and. Disjunction is the or, and that's it. And then unit just means drop the thing at the very end. If we switch to things like short, you see it switches to the symbol for and. That's just kind of baked in. Narrow seems kind of weird. It's like unit kind of. Oh, look at that, no commas. That's crazy. But you have options. That's the important thing. And again, baked, I was literally about to write code for this when I found this spec. Plural formatting. All right, this is the one I'll warn you right now. This is weird as heck. In my mind, I was saying a different word and I censored. So, Intl plural rules helps with describing the plural of something and the other of something. You should feel free to be angry at me now. API tells you the form based on the number. And so as an example of this, in English, right, we have a rule. I have a quantity of something. If it's any number but 1, we use the singular. If it's 0, 2, -1 and below, it's always plural. -1 cats, 0 cats, 1 cat. 1 cat, 2 cats, 3 cats, 4 cats. That is in English. In other languages, they're like, oh, no. If it's 0, we do something. If it's 1, we do something. If it's 2, we do something. If it's 3, we do something. And if it's 4 to infinity, then we're done. That is what this spec does for you. It does not do the translation for you. It's going to return basically what form you should write, and that form is going to be a value 0, 1, 2, few, many, or other. And then you take that value and you look at your own translations and then you output the right one. So I have 6 cats. I want to render in your language either cat or cat, and I've already paid a translator. I didn't use a translation API, right? Right? We paid a human, because humans do that the best. All right. I say that even having used a lot of translation APIs. I have translations for Spanish, French, German, Japanese, etc. I don't know if I use cat or cats or xians, etc. in different languages. To figure out if I should use the plural of dog in Japan, I could use this API and it would tell me. And again, other languages may have multiple versions. So we're just something S, like that's our rule. Other languages may have something blah, something blah blah, something blah blah, and then use this to infinity. Again, this API will give it to you, uses a select method, and I will show you an example. I have one item, and when I run this API, it returned for American English that I should use the 1 form. So I get 1 cat, 1 leaf. If I go up to 2, I get 2 cats and 2 leaves. Now the code for that, I'm going to skip over all the DOM crap, was I had hard-coded cat and cats, leaf and leaves. I ran right there. I said, tell me the rule to use for my language, in this case, the baked-in language from my browser, and it returned other. And I had to have logic to say, for other, use that. If I go to 0, it should go to there as well. This API also supports the idea of what to use for first, second, third, fourth, etc. They call this the ordinal version of it. And I have to, again, and I stole this right from the docs, I wrote logic that says when you return 1, do first, 2, second, and so forth. And obviously, this would only work for English. But if I'm fine with that and I needed a way to show the ordinal number with the little suffix at the end, this would work. I apologize. I feel like that was very vague. I've read it and it landed about here. And I put that in my brain list of things to think about when I really have to worry about it. Because I have enough things to worry about in life. I'm not going to worry about this. I'm happy it exists. It's there. And if I need to get deeper into it later, I will look at it then. Segmenting strings, this last one, Intl.segmenter. It is a locale-specific way to break a string into parts, either graphemes, words, or sentences, and returns an iterator, not an array, just to be fancy. The reason you care about this, and I stole it from the docs because it was perfect, using string.split doesn't work in different languages. We probably all assume that, but raise your hand if you use string.split on an empty string. Only 3 of us will admit to splitting a string at the space to count words. I think a couple of you are fibbing. Or how about using a regex on a white space? A few more, okay. Well, guess what? There's multiple languages where that just simply would not work. So this API, let me actually show the code behind this. It is, I made an instance of a segmenter. I told it what granularity, grapheme, words, or sentences, and then I just convert that iterator to an array and show it. And so if I do, this is the end of the world, blame the cats. And by the graphemes, it's really broken down, but typically we want to do words. And you can see I not only get the words, I also get the separator, which means if you do want to use this to correctly count words, you have to filter out by is word like equals true. But in theory, this will work everywhere and give you the words and then allow you to do a count as well. If we switch this to sentences, it gets a little bit simpler where it just returns 2 items. Interesting thing about this, if you have bad grammar, it still works. No, actually it breaks. Now it goes to 1 sentence. If I fix that and do it, but forget the space, it also considers that to be 1 sentence. So this is where any human will look at this and say, yes, that is absolutely 2 sentences. And in this case, you're kind of screwed, unfortunately. You can't split on period because Mr. So-and-so would break it. Any acronym abbreviation, would break that as well. Garbage in, garbage out, right? So as a quick final demo, I just want to show you an example of what it's like to actually use this. I built a very bogus, but probably kind of real-world scenario where I call an API to get sales data, and I render it in a table. Shockingly, I didn't build a single-page application with 500 megabytes of JavaScript. I just progressively enhanced the web page. Don't tell anybody that I did that. And I didn't use a build process. There's no grunt, gulp, npm, yarn, yelp, etc. I just said, hey, I can make this page a little better with a few lines of JavaScript. So again, called an API, rendered out, and that's perfectly readable, if a bit verbose, right? I got those native date objects from my data. I just rendered it in the browser. It was very, very verbose. And I got those numbers, and it's all there. If I want to make this just a tiny bit better, spend 5 minutes and add intl. I now have dates that are easier to read. Again, has the issue of day, month, year versus year, month, day, but we won't worry about that. And those numbers are a lot easier. And if I do care, I also built in tooltip support. That's tiny. But if you mouse over the number, you could see the full thing. And again, to give credit where credit's due, that's what I saw Twitter doing. I thought that was a good UX for that. The code for this, I'll just skip all the boring HTML, was essentially, I get my data, I call that API, and then for each sales information, I'm calling a function, and all I'm doing is making use of intl. By the way, this is slightly wasteful that I recreate the object on every single iteration of the data table. I don't care. I could make it a bit more performant if I wanted to. Other things I could do, when I render the real number, all I did in my HTML was use the title attribute. I could actually format that number as well, so that when you mouse over, you get the real sales, but you at least get the commas, spaces, or whatever. You can have multiple different number formatting things going on at the same time. So both these demos are linked to in the slide deck, so you can see like a before and after. And I will leave you with MDN for the docs. That's my go-to for the last 10 plus years for anything web related. There is a great website called the Intl Explorer, which gives you a playground for a whole crap ton of stuff, including things I didn't have a chance to talk about today. But if you really want to see like on one screen, all the different ways of formatting, this web app has that baked in. And on that, any questions? Yes.
You touched up on this earlier, but like with like libraries like Moment.js, is there any point for these type of libraries anymore? Or
His question was, is there any point or need for libraries like Moment.js? I think we discovered a couple edge cases today. Scott and the guy there asked about providing masks, where I want precise control over every aspect. You can't do that, like, period. So I would say that is still a reason. I think I think Moment has support for, like, if you type the word week, it can translate that to a number of milliseconds, which I think somebody else was asking about. So it has some more stuff built in. I do think its time is running out because I know there's a major JavaScript date time overhaul coming within a year or two. And you know, one nice thing about the web platform now is that typically when a new feature ships, it gets pretty wide adoption much quicker, with Apple being the lovely giant elephant in the room. But they're getting a little better about things as well. So I would say with that coming and with stuff like this, I would not see much of a future for Moment.js. Anybody here work on Moment.js? Just stretching, okay. All right. Waiting for a library author to come up and throw something at me. Well, if nobody has any questions, I really appreciate y'all showing up, and have a great rest of the conference.